I'm Clifton.
And together, for the first time, we are functionally literate. What are we talking about today, Clifton?
Today, we're talking about a lovely book called Delay, Deny, and Defend. And the author's name, which I should have brought up here, is J. Feinman.
Yeah, in this book, the subtitle is Why Insurance Companies Don't Pay Claims and What You Can Do About It.
Yes, a very uniquely American book, I would say. I know insurance isn't just American, but, you know, it's...
Well, so, I mean, health insurance is...
For sure.
Mostly uniquely American. Which is why we're talking about this, isn't it? Because of health insurance. So yeah, let's get into, before we get into the book itself, why we're discussing it. For historical context, for anybody that's listening to this, like, hypothetically 10, 20 years in the future and is confused why we might be doing that. So, was this end of November or was this start of December?
Oh my goodness. I should have that on hand. I don't. I think it was the end of November.
Approximately a month ago, at the time of recording, there was a man whose name I do not remember, but his name is not really relevant to the subject, honestly, who was the CEO of United Healthcare. I think his name was Brian.
That sounds right.
Yeah. He was in New York on, I want to say 6th Avenue, on his way into a conference. It was this huge conference that a bunch of people from United Healthcare were going to go to. And at 6:30 in the morning, that man was murdered. He was shot in the back by a man who ran away on an e-bike. And etched on the bullets of the casings were the words, deny, defend, depose. Which many people drew a connection from those words to this book that we're going to talk about today. Because the book is about insurance companies and why they don't pay their claims.
Right.
And oddly enough, this book doesn't really talk about health insurance.
It doesn't really talk too much about health insurance. It does give some lip service to it, especially in regards to health conditions that may arise from auto accidents relating to the auto insurance section of the book and things like that.
It did raise a question in my mind that I don't think the book actually addressed, which was, so you get in an auto accident. You gotta go to the hospital. How does the interaction between your auto insurance and your health insurance work? Right? Like, do they both pay out the claims? Are they gonna arbitrate which company pays for what? Like, that's not discussed.
I'm afraid I'm not really knowledgeable enough to know it. I know the health insurance in general, you still do have the premium to cover. I wonder if the auto insurance would help pay toward the premium also. Or not premium, but the deductible is what I meant to say. But I'm not sure, honestly.
Well, anyways, I gotta be honest. I got so mad reading this book. It was infuriating because peppered throughout are stories of people who were in accidents or suffered some kind of loss, like, you know, like their house caught on fire or someone died. And then stories of what these insurance companies would do to either not pay at all or reduce pay as much as possible, right? And so it at the very beginning kind of lays out what it means by delay, deny, defend. The first thing a company will do when you make an insurance company will do when you make a claim is they will try to find ways to delay paying you as much as often as possible, like for as long as possible. They will deny claims if they have any cause to do so, or even if they don't have cause to do so, or they will come up with reasons to not. And then they will defend that decision.
Meaning litigate. Yeah.
By litigating.
Right.
They will litigate the hell out of any claim decision that they make if you try to appeal that claim. So, you know, if you are going to fight that. You have to have a lawyer.
For sure. In fact, that's one of the things the insurance companies are trying to make you do or not do is to be represented.
Yeah.
I think it mentions in part of it if we can, it separates the clients making claims into two different pools to start.
Yeah, and in one of the chapters where it talks about auto insurance,
Yeah.
it says that they will separate out their policyholders via those that have an attorney and those that don't. And those that don't, they will do everything in their power to ensure that you don't get one.
Right. I actually have a quote here from the book toward the end. It's on page 52 on mine, but I know that doesn't mean much considering it's an ebook copy. So let's see. Whenever there is a segment of a claim where the claimant is not initially represented, the stated objective is keep attorney out from the insurance companies. In general, represented claimants recover 2 to 5 times as much as those without the aid of a lawyer. So they are very financially motivated to not have represented claimants.
I believe that is chapter 7, yes?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, let's just lay out the chapters a
Yeah,
little
sure.
bit.
Here, let me go ahead if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So the way it starts out, we get an introduction, which gives us a kind of a brief overview of the idea of insurance and how insurance is very different than other products that you might purchase, because it's not something you purchase, it's more of a promise that you purchase.
Yeah.
The promise being, if you give this certain company money, you then have the peace of mind that if something bad or negative is to happen to you in the future, you can have some financial assistance for either all or some of the negative event.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes into the introduction, and then it talks about how insurance works, how it should work.
That's chapter 1.
Yeah,
and that
chapter
one I
1.
found interesting because it gives you the history of insurance.
Right, going back thousands of years. And then I think the first American insurance was like a company with Ben Franklin at the head of it,
Ben
too?
Franklin and a bunch of folks in, what was it, Boston? I think it was Boston. They formed...
This is
wasn't
in 1752.
It wasn't called an insurance company. It was called a contributorship, I believe.
Yes.
It was specifically to cover the loss of property due to fire.
That's right. The full name here is the Philadelphia Contributorship for the Insurance of Houses from Loss by Fire.
Philadelphia, not Boston. There we go. Yeah. So that was like the first American insurance company. Prior to that, there was companies that would cover lots of cargo sent overseas.
A lot of it was cargo, it looked like.
Yeah.
Going back 5,000 years, from Babylonian merchants found investors who agreed to accept the risk of cargo loss at sea in return for a payment.
Right. And then it gets into what the modern idea of an insurance company is. Very simple, right? You give them money, and then if something happens, they pay that out. Right.
And the premiums that you pay are all based on risk, or how much risk the company is willing to take on your part.
For example, I used to live in a house that was near a floodplain, so that affected the premiums that my parents had to pay.
Right. If you are a heavy smoker, your life insurance is going to be heavier.
The thing that stood out to me in that chapter was how insurance companies make their money.
Yeah. Are you talking about whenever they hold on to money?
I'm talking about a concept called float.
Yes, the float. So you don't simply hold the money, you invest the money.
I did not know this, and this feels very insidious to me.
Banks do the same thing.
Sure, but it talks about that, but it also lays out the difference between what a bank does and what an insurance company does.
Sure.
You give a bank your money to hold on to, but of course they don't actually hold on to it. They invest it.
Right.
But the difference is you can take that money out at any time, and they have to give you back exactly what you gave them. And they may even give you a little bit of an interest rate. It's pennies,
yes,
but they'll give you
sometimes.
something. The difference between a bank and an insurance company is that all of the money that you give an insurance company and that they get from everybody else, they can invest that, and it's called float. But they are under absolutely no obligation to show you any kind of return on that. And in addition, most likely you're never going to get that money back unless you suffer a loss. And even if you do, depending on how long you've been paying those premiums, odds are you're never going to get that return on investment back. Ever.
There's a quote here by Warren Buffett talking about float.
I have this one too. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Mind.
Yeah. Warren Buffett, by the way, who's Berkshire Hathaway owns Geico and other insurance companies.
Yeah. He said, it is money we hold that is not ours, but which we get to invest. The book goes on to say, a company that can take advantage of float and also produce an underwriting profit, a combined ratio less than 100, has the best of both worlds. Buffett trumpeted in his folksy 2009 letter to shareholders that we were paid $2.8 billion to hold our float in 2008. Charlie Munger, which was Buffett's longtime business partner, Charlie and I find this enjoyable.
And again, that's not money from premiums. That's money from just the float.
It's just from holding all the money that they were given and then investing in it. And, they're under no obligation to pay the earnings back, just the float. And so this is where the delay, deny, defend thing comes in, right? Because
it's a good reason to delay if you can make money from delaying.
Yeah. Right. Because if they delay paying back your claim, that's money they can hold on to for just a little bit longer and make a little bit more of an investment on. And so multiply that by millions of claims, that's a lot of money.
Right.
Anyways, we get chapter 2, which is how insurance doesn't work.
And chapter 2 really kind of goes into insurance doesn't work, and one of the reasons they give is the switch from a focus on paying out claims and caring for their, what would you say, just clients? I'm not sure. Subscribers?
The term that the book uses is policy holders.
Yes, that's right. Policyholders. Focusing on them as opposed to on stockholders.
So this is where we get to what I like to think of is the capitalist problem. This is a problem that is prevalent in all aspects of society, not just in America, but the world. The moment money becomes the sole focus, it bastardizes anything it touches.
Yeah. Money, this imaginary thing that we have.
Right. Insurance companies obviously are businesses like anything else. If they're put in a situation where they have to pay out too many claims, they have to go file for bankruptcy. So it's obviously in their best interest to not pay as many claims as possible, which is a bit of a conflict of interest.
Right. But it's kind of, how companies exist in capitalist societies like this. My dad always asked me, he thought it was a joke. It's not very funny, but what does X company make? Like, what does McDonald's make? What does Apple make? And the answer is never, well, they make electronics or they make food. It's, well, they make money. Yeah, that's what they make.
They make money.
It's not really that funny. It's just true.
It's just tragically true.
So I can see that they are incentivized to do that, and in order to keep operating, they do need to make money. I get that. But
yeah. It's interesting because like the early chapters of the book lay out how insurance companies used to work versus how they shifted to how they now work. Now, bearing in mind, this book came out in 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
So it's about 14 years out of date, but so much of what it talks about still is very true to the present day and the situation that we live in now.
Right. So
the way that it started was, take like health insurance, for example, right? A lot of health insurance companies like Anthem, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, I believe is one of the companies that the book talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Like those were separate companies. They weren't even companies. They came about because people wanted to take care of each other. So they all invested a little bit of money, and then the fund would pay out to the people that needed it. Like it was that simple. And over the years, a few of these companies went out of business because a lot of people needed help, right? But then over time, the businesses consolidated, and this is something that happens a lot. You'll have smaller insurance companies that get bought up by larger insurance companies, absorbed, and then you've got a lot of people in that system that were absorbed that are like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no purpose here now. The only reason I'm here is because they couldn't fire me as part of the agreement of purchasing the company. I don't think that comes up in the book, but
No,
I've heard of that happening a lot.
I understand.
Chapter 3, I'll be honest, that one was very dry, and a lot of it was lost on me. That one was moral hazard, the bottom line, and the origins of delay, deny, defend. That one, it was just a lot of terms that were lost on me, a lot of figures and percentages, etc., and I was just like,
Chapter 3 starts talking about soft markets versus hard markets and all of these claims that, I'm not an economist.
Yeah, no. But Chapter 4, though, that one had my full attention. That one is called McKinsey Redefines the Game, Claims as a Profit Center.
Right.
So let's talk about McKinsey a little bit. They are a consultant company. They are famous for not advertising at all. Those that are in the know about them. And so you'll have these insurance companies and this started back in the 90s.
Yeah, and just to be clear, a consulting firm, which I'm sure a lot of people who are in businesses such as healthcare are familiar with consulting firms. They are companies that are outside the industry that they are consulting in. They will go into the business, look at stuff, read papers, really investigate all different aspects of the company, and then give opinions and presentations on things that could be done to maximize profits generally.
And that's the rub.
Right.
It's about maximizing profit. And
yeah.
So McKinsey spoke with a lot of insurance companies on this subject about how to shift their goals and priorities towards maximizing profit, coming up with terms like leakage, which is literally just paying out your claims.
Yeah.
Like that term, I hate that term. Like that term shouldn't exist, in my opinion.
It sounds so negative.
It sounds so negative, but how can paying someone what they're owed be a negative thing?
There's so many portions in this where it describes the mindset of the insurance company, not wanting to pay out claims, not wanting to do what they have agreed to do in the forms. And I always just wanted to shout like, well, then why are you an insurance company?
Yeah.
And the answer is there's a lot of money in it, and
Of
they
course.
can make a lot of money. But
So much money. I mean, just live on the float. Oh, we're just being paid to hold this money. Like, that chapter really got to me. Were there any notable things from that chapter that you wanted to mention?
I don't have any specific quotes, but just the way that McKinsey, the organization, would go in and give these huge presentations that would then be privileged, that are not shared with anyone, even on like lawsuit requests. There was one company, I can't remember specifically, but the court ordered them to show the presentations, the PowerPoints, the whatever from McKinsey, and they just kept denying and refusing to do so.
Allstate.
Was it Allstate?
It was Allstate.
Yeah, they're in good hands.
So in the introduction of this book, it talks about how the two insurance companies that will be discussed the most in it are Allstate and State Farm.
Right.
Those are the two that were talked about the most. Not necessarily because they're the worst offenders, although
the most prolific and the biggest, right?
They're right. And so therefore they're the ones that are the most well documented.
Yeah.
But even then there's lots of holes in the documentation because like there was in one instance, like it was talking about how a judge mandated that Allstate get fined $25,000 a day until they gave the documentation that was required of them, and they never gave it up.
Right.
They were fined millions of dollars, and they still didn't do it.
It's insane.
That is insane. But yeah, no, it was Allstate. Sorry, where
No, that's pretty much it. Just that everything is so steeped in secrecy for the consulting firm, probably because most of the terms and slides they use are so, I mean, maybe not like totally unethical, but probably dehumanizing, at least the clients and policyholders themselves, in that if you don't want to pay out, we need to stop thinking about these policyholders as people and think about them as criminals who are trying to steal our money.
Yeah, so that was mainly talked about in Chapter 10, Insurance Fraud and Other Frauds,
Yes.
about this whole thing where, and again, this all started with McKinsey, right? In this reorientation from paying out claims to denying as many claims as you can get away with, it became about maximizing that. And so one of the ways they did that was a prolific marketing scheme that, I mean, it just feels like straight up propaganda to me.
Yeah, they're really trying to sway public opinion to think that insurance fraud is a whole lot more common than it actually is. I'm sorry to jump ahead to chapter 10 there.
No, that's fine. Because, like you were saying before we actually got started, like so much of this of what's discussed in this book is interconnected. Like, you know, this book will reference other chapters often out of order.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I didn't think of this until you said so before we were recording. I mean, this is basically a textbook.
It is.
You know, like, I don't think anybody was actually expected to read this in order like I did. To the point that I didn't mention this to you. So this book is so dry.
Yes.
It's so dry that at one point, you know, I was reading this in bed and I got distracted. You know, my wife was saying something to me. I set my phone down. And then when I looked at it again, I was on like halfway through chapter 5.
Sure.
And then because I set my phone down carelessly, it shifted to like a page after the start of chapter 9.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I read it. I started reading all about Katrina, and I didn't even realize that I had gone to another chapter. I didn't even realize. But that's how dry this book is.
It's dry, but it's so chock full of informative data.
Absolutely.
And infuriating anecdotes, honestly.
Yes.
So if I could talk about the fraud section,
Please do.
that we were saying there, they were really, really trying to push public opinion to believe that fraud was just super prevalent throughout the whole nation. And there's a quote in here where a Massachusetts Insurance Fraud Bureau investigated the claims of fraud from the insurance industries. And okay, so over a 10-year period, 17,274 cases of fraud were reported by insurers to the Bureau. And then, so they started like narrowing it down, which was actually fraud, which was just cases that settled, which for some reason can count as fraud. If you settle your case after 5 years of litigating it and you just decide I'm done, it's like, well, that was probably fraud. That's why they settled. Anyway, after winnowing that huge number down, 368 of the original 17,274 referrals actually involved criminal fraud. Which is a ratio of about 25 to 1.
I'm glad you said that.
Over 10 years.
I put that in my notes too.
Yeah.
The actual ratio of alleged fraud to actual fraud was 25 to 1.
So it happens, sure, but not nearly what they want you to think to justify their actions.
But because of this concerted campaign to really express how supposedly prevalent insurance fraud is.
Right.
It resulted in a couple things. One of them being is they actually very likely increased the numbers of fraud cases because you've got some people that are like, okay, well, if you're just going to assume I'm a criminal right out the bat, screw you. If you delved deeply enough into it, you could find a correlation between this and how cops treat projects. The more aggressive the pursuit of fraud, the more likely that it will produce behavior that can be labeled as fraud. An aggressive investigation may frustrate and delay the claimant who needs the money to pay for medical bills or repairs to a house, so she may give up and settle or even abandon her claim. That behavior then becomes evidence of the fraud that was initially alleged, right?
Which is,
and that chapter gets into how these companies assess for fraud, because right off the bat, the moment a claim is made, their IT systems that they use
throw up red flags for fraud.
Will start assessing for fraud immediately. Some of them will do to like a 1 to 10 point system.
Right.
If it's a 5, it's like, okay, look into this. If it's a 10, just move this over to the I forget the exact term that they use, but basically a fraud investigation unit in the company.
Right. Yeah, there was one example of what could trigger a fraud investigation, which was like a large family of like 5 or 6 or whatever people involved in an auto incident in like an older car. That then whenever they are seeking treatment following that, they all have the same doctor because it's a family doctor. Well, that's a red flag for fraud, because all having the same doctor give similar diagnoses. It's like, well, why is the same doctor seeing all these people? Well, it's a family doctor. Or it's an old car. That's probably a good case for fraud. There's all kinds of red flags in there.
Yeah, I believe what it said was, oh, okay, well, it was an old car.
Right.
You've got everyone going to the same doctor. Everyone's got similar injuries. Yeah, they were all in the same accident. That's it, and that's the problem, right? When you have software making these decisions, because let's rewind back to chapter 5, and I really enjoyed this one because it was called Mr. Incredible Goes to Work, the new systematic claims process. So I really enjoyed this one because coming back to, the modern day and why we were even discussing this book at all,
right.
I've seen so much opinions and critiques and just like dives into different aspects of culture, and one of the most prominent things was a clip from Mr. Incredible. You have kids, I'm sure you're familiar.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Incredible was no longer a superhero. He had to get a job, and so he became a claims adjuster. And he hated his job, and he would do everything he could to help the people filing claims. And then he was called into his boss's office, and his boss is not happy about it. And he's like, aren't we supposed to help people?
Yeah, my favorite quote. Yeah, we're supposed to help our people, starting with our stockholders, Bob.
Who's helping them out? It's like, God. And it gets into like, now the way Bob was handling all of this was, well, I mean, it's not strictly accurate to real life, and a big reason why that is so is because of what a claims adjuster's job used to be versus what it now is. Right? Because it used to be, back before we had computers, aiding claims adjusters with this process. And I say aiding with scare quotes.
More of an individualized detective-like job almost.
Yeah, like, you would, talk to the people, and you would, like, you would talk to the people filing the claim, and you would talk to whoever you needed to talk to that would be involved with paying out that claim, like, be it, doctors, if it's a health matter, or, anybody involved in the auto industry, if it's an auto matter, or, anything to do with your house. Like, you would talk to a bunch of different people, and you would make a determination on how much should be paid out, because, some policies, they'll just give you a flat amount. Other policies will do their best to, replace the loss, or, if there's a significant loss of quality of life, will try and give you an amount that will help mitigate that.
I feel like you're referring to homeowners insurance a lot right now, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's because that was kind of, this book focused a lot on homeowners insurance. My point being, the job of a claims adjuster used to be actually talking to people and like figuring out how the claim should be processed. And now it is something entirely different, right? Like, it used to be this job required a lot of training. Now it's maybe a week or 3.
Sometimes.
Because these companies will use IT software systems. You know, they plug in all of the information for the claim into the program, and the program will tell you how much should be paid out, or if it should be paid out at all.
Right. I'm trying to see the chapter where it specifically starts talking about one of the insurance company.
So there, a couple different chapters talk about a couple different ones. The two that are most talked about in this book is Colossus, which is used in relation to auto insurance claims, and then Exactimate, which is used in reference to homes. The issue with both of those being that, first of all, it takes a lot of the agency of the claims adjusters out of it. And then also, the softwares are not efficient for a number of reasons.
Right. So Colossus, to start, it begins talking about it more in detail in chapter 7.
Yeah.
And Colossus is a computer program, unfortunately not a strapping member of the X-Men that, might make you question your sexuality if you look at him too much.
Yeah.
But Colossus kind of takes a lot of the claims data that is then put in by what used to be claims adjusters, and collates it and gathers it and kind of uses an algorithm to then spit out a number, a severity point total for the claim. Now, that's not like a dollar figure. It's more, this is the number that you can then use to base your dollar figure on.
Yeah.
And the issue with gathering all of the data from the medical record and from different reports is there's this thing in technology called garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I thought that was a fun concept. I'd never heard of that one.
Right. Which, if you put in bad data, you're going to get bad results.
So the book explains it's not necessarily the data that you give that's bad, right? What's bad about the data is that oftentimes a lot of the data will be omitted, or it'll be tuned in such a way that you're intentionally going to get a lowballed number. Never more than what you should get, ever. Always less. There was something here that really stood out to me. There's this guy, David Silverman. He was the Allstate vice president back in the early 90s. They were going to change the value of claims by instituting a nationwide program to set the values by a computer program called Colossus. We were told by Mr. Silverman, this was a quote from Maureen Reed, we were told by Mr. Silverman that Allstate could set the values as whatever level they wanted, and those values could be enforced by Allstate through the CCPR program. The CCPR program was something that Allstate started as a result of their consultations with McKinsey. It's what resulted in the claims process being reorganized, let's say. By setting claim values at lower levels through the Colossus program, we were told that profits would go up. We were also told by Mr. Silverman, among others, that high-level corporate executives had committed to reducing amounts on claims by lowering the Colossus values, which would result in significant bonuses to those executives. So, it goes on to explain that another company, I believe it was Farmers. Yeah, it was Farmers. They were told, okay, so put in all this data, but don't include anything that involves claims going over 50,000. And then after you put in all this data, lower by 20%.
Right, and that's something you can do with the Colossus data too. Since it is an algorithm, you can just tell it to tune it up or down, which never up because you don't want to give out more money. But yeah, it mentions 20% below the fair value of the claims, and that then gives them more profit if it doesn't pay out quite as much.
Yeah. It's just so... The thing that I kept coming back to was a fragment of a quote that's lodged in my mind for years now. The banality of evil. Right? Like, truly evil things, it's difficult to recognize it for what it is because it will be veiled behind some corporate / bureaucratic nonsense that completely removes any kind of blame from one person, right? Like, who are you supposed to blame? It's a systematic problem.
Sure.
Anyways, let's talk about Exactimate.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So that one is primarily discussed in chapter 8 and a little bit in chapter 9. It kind of does the same thing as Colossus. The main issue with it being that it is better suited for cookie cutter homes, manufactured homes, than for, like, you know, all possible homes that could exist. Like,
right. And part of that's because I think you can put in data on, like, let's say a wall collapsed and we're trying to replace the wall.
That was one example it gave.
Yeah. The wall has a window. Okay. So it's just like the set area, length, width, all that of the wall, plus a window. So we need drywall of a certain size. We need paint to cover it. And I'm going to give you a quote for all this numbers based on, this is about how much that, you know, it should cost. But there's so much more to replacing a wall than just the cost of the paint and the cost of the window at the lowest value. You can do things different ways. You can build things different ways. So it's,
One example that it gave was there was a townhouse that had like some sort of gas line explosion or something.
That one was a little hard for me to follow, but yeah.
Well, basically, you know, one claims adjuster was assessing it and determined that based on the information he was given, okay,
Right.
only the top portion of this like shared wall needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then another guy came in who was like, no, this entire wall needs to be fixed. And so, like, the amount of money that should have been paid out by that claim, the difference based off those two assessments, the difference was like $680,000.
Right.
Let's shift back to we're making our way through these chapters, right? So chapter 5 was Mr. Incredible Goes to Work. Chapter 6 was lawyers, claimants, and Into the Mist, segmenting automobile claims. So this one I found very interesting, right? Because so chapter 5 kind of lays out how the job of the claims adjuster shifted over time. Chapter 6 goes into how the job of insurance lawyers has shifted over time, specifically insurance lawyers who work for the side of the insurance company, right?
Sure.
It used to be, and in fact, I actually I took a note here. So this is the final paragraph of chapter 5. The story of the new systematic claim process comes full circle. Claims adjusters once exercised considerable discretion in determining how much a claimant was fairly owed. Attorneys exercised considerable independent professional judgment about whether and how litigation should be conducted. Increasingly, they have become agents of a system of claim processing that aims to increase company profits rather than serve policyholders. The system affects anyone who files a claim under an auto or homeowner policy. So I misspoke a little bit. It does talk about lawyers in chapter 6, but there was a quote in chapter 5 that stuck with me. So this one was a defense lawyer who bemoaned the changes in insurance defense practice over the last decade. Oh man, much more oversight by the insurance companies, much more concern with the bottom line, much more control or attempt to control the case by the insurance companies rather than to rely on my judgment. I feel like I'm being second-guessed a lot more. And it's getting to the point where it's almost an adversarial relationship. Adversarial isn't the right word. But it's like the companies who are hiring us to do the best job for their insureds don't trust us enough to do the best job. They have to second-guess what we're doing. And the reason why they're second-guessing, I'm done with the quote. The reason why they're second-guessing is because they don't want these experts and advisors to give an honest opinion. They want an opinion that allows them to deny the claim or lowball how much they pay out.
So, and sometimes they will even try to get the advice that they are looking for whenever they are asking for say a physician report. There's a good quote here in was it chapter 7, I think?
Chapter 7, Insurance Company Rules for Auto Claims.
Right, where they are ordering let's see here, a physician comment, and the quote is, "Please provide specific answers to the questions asked and make no recommendations unless so requested. Your report should address the following," then lists a series of topics, of which the most important was item number 6, concerning the causal relationship between the accident in which the claimant was injured and the claimed injuries. The physician was instructed to address whether the accident caused the injury only if in negative. End quote. So essentially,
double underlined.
Yeah, double underlined in there in the actual report, so that the physician really knows, hey, if you think that they did not cause the injuries here, say that. If you think it did cause it, maybe just don't mention that.
This was a part of a larger discussion in that chapter regarding something called IMEs, short for Independent Medical Examinations, which are completely bogus. They've been derided as insurance medical examinations, which I find incredibly amusing in regards to health insurance, because the entire health insurance claims process feels like the insurance company second and third and fourth and fifth guessing every single thing the medical experts have to say about their patients.
Right. One of a good example here, just from my experience, is sorry, I'm a nurse.
Yeah, no, yeah. We should have actually gotten into that. You're here specifically talking about this because when I put out there, like, hey, who wants to discuss this book with me? You were like, hey, I work in the healthcare industry. I have thoughts about this. So what exactly is it that you do?
So I'm currently about to start a new job, actually, where I'll be doing kind of orthopedic, patient-centered guidance throughout care. But I have a history of being an ICU nurse for about 8 years down in Springfield, and I've been up here in quality management and stuff like that. I have a master's in nursing, all that. But anyway, so I've seen a lot of insurance-related issues and heard a lot of physicians complain about insurance. One of them is that there are certain things that insurance companies make you do in order to have a diagnosis that they will then cover. For example, if there is something wrong with a joint, you need to get an x-ray first of a joint, okay? Sometimes that makes sense if there's like a fracture or something like that. But there are other joint injuries, and I won't go into details, but that will not show up on an x-ray. So an x-ray is completely useless to get, but you have to get it because there are these certain steps that each insurance company requires you to go through. So everything that you want to do has to be kind of portioned out in order. Otherwise, it causes so many headaches, and they will just deny you to get an MRI because you didn't get an x-ray 3 months ago. There's a lot to it.
Speaking personally, I had what I now understand to be, after going through a very long, laborious process of figuring out what the hell was wrong with me, I have a slight degradation in my neck that makes it so whenever I look down, it pinches a nerve. That pain goes to my left shoulder. So for a very long time, I thought that I somehow injured my left shoulder. No, it's just a nerve in my spine that whenever I'm looking down, standing still for long periods of time, you know, when I'm doing like household things like cooking or dishes, over time, over the course of 5-10 minutes, it'll just start to ache, and it'll get progressively worse and worse and worse until it's so unbearable that I just have to lie down on a flat surface, a flat, hard surface, just so the pain will go away. I could not figure out what this was for the longest period of time, and I had to go through so many hoops because my insurance insisted, okay, there's a process. Let's start with some physical therapy. And the physical therapy helped a little bit, but it didn't address the actual problem. It took me so long until I found the right doctor that was basically like, okay, you need an ablation. And so an ablation basically is where they will go into your spine and cauterize specific nerves, deaden those nerves, so that way, Because I mean, like, really, there's nothing actually wrong with me. It's deferred nerve pain. So they just sliced those nerves so that I could stop having unbearable pain for no reason. But it took me years to figure that out. And now I'm in like $5,000 of medical debt.
I think so many people have stories like that too, where they just have to go through all these hoops that just make it such a pain just to get help.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Relating it back to the book, there was actually an example kind of like that regarding the auto insurance stuff. In chapter 6 regarding MIST. So MIST stands for minor impact soft tissue. In other words, whiplash. Oftentimes, when someone gets whiplash, they will want you to get an x-ray, even though you can't really identify whiplash with an x-ray.
Right. And even the term whiplash itself, I think insurance
is a very negatively stigmatized term in the insurance industry.
Right. There's just so many jokes about it, even on TV. It's like, oh, it's whiplash. Something's wrong. Let's just say I have whiplash. Put on a funny little neck brace.
It's also a common way to try to fraud your auto insurance is by, after you're getting in an accident, claiming you have whiplash.
This chapter 7 also really goes into things that some insurance companies will do from like the point of contact with the insured. To try and reduce the payout. Some things like just...
Some of those things I've read about them, they made me so mad.
Yeah. There's one here, like a homeowner, okay, I'm going to quote a little bit, kind of telephones the insurance company's claims call center, reports that his chimney collapsed. So the claims representative on the other end of the phone, they could simply respond correctly that collapse is not covered and leave it at that. So then possibly the homeowner would accept it and be like, oh, okay, that's the end of the story. But in fact, collapse is not included, but it doesn't mean the damage to the chimney was. Like if the chimney was struck by lightning or a falling tree caused the collapse, if wind loosened it or something like that, then it might be covered. So just like lying by omission, it mentions really... trying to get people to think that you're their friend and they're in their best interest right away, so that they'll try and close out the case soon.
It gets into how, oftentimes, and maybe this isn't malicious, but in some ways it is because of the incentives that claims adjusters are operating under, right? Like in an earlier chapter, it talked about how the metric for how good of a job someone is doing is how many claims are they currently working on. But now it's how many claims did you deny?
Right.
Not
pay out correctly.
Right. This episode is brought to you by me. I made this show. And it's a pretty shoestring budget. I have a membership to a local studio, Vidwest Studios. That's how I have all the equipment and the space that I need to record. I pay for that. I pay for books. Or I get them from the library, and that's about it. So if you want to support the show, there are a few ways to do that. In the episode description, there will be a link to the Patreon. You can pitch in $1 a month, and or you can do more. There's a guy, Josh Hughes. He gives us like $12 a month. We appreciate you, Josh. You're the reason why we pay for the studio at all. But he does not provide enough for us to pay for books necessarily, so you could pitch in and we could pay for books.
And listen, really, he's quite honest about the shoestring budget nature of this. He doesn't even have shoestrings on right now. That is, in fact, where the budget has gone, not to shoestrings, so just be aware.
I'm wearing Skechers. If you like these mid-breaks, but you still want to support the show, you can contribute a one-time donation to our PayPal. That would also be cool. As well, just do the normal stuff that you could do to support a show, like share your favorite episodes with friends, rate the show on whatever platform you listen to it on. Like if you listen on Spotify, give us a 4 or 5 star rating. If you listen on YouTube, like the episode, leave comments if whatever platform you're listening to this on allows you to do that. Engage with the show.
Listen to it on a plane without headphones.
That'd be cool.
Don't do that.
I mean, I wouldn't do that, but hey, like free publicity. this free publicity. And also, if you have any book suggestions that you would like us to read, let us know either in the comments or you can email us. We have an email address for the podcast, funk.lit.pod@gmail.com. That is funk.lit.pod@gmail.com. So when it was talking about like instances of the home, they were talking about how claims adjusters are not going to provide you all of the information of your benefits.
Right.
You have to know your benefits, which can be difficult when your policy is 15 to 20 pages and full of a bunch of legal jargon that you probably don't understand.
And homeowners insurance is especially complicated because homes are complicated. There's so much to it. There's so much that can happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
The chapter 9 on Hurricane Katrina and other insurance.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The Katrina chapter was...
It's very infuriating. They talk about exceptions and relating to wind damage versus water damage.
So the term was efficient proximate cause.
Yes.
That specifically they got into. And this was something that I kind of wondered about as well before they even got to it. So efficient proximate cause basically is this term that is used when multiple things could be the contributor to the damage.
Right.
So we've got Hurricane Katrina. What is a hurricane? A hurricane is a really powerful storm. Lots of wind, lots of water. And so when Katrina occurred, there were so many people trying to file claims and so many insurance companies that were trying to deny those claims because they wanted to call Katrina a flood.
Yeah, there's a quote in here talking about how they really tried to relabel it even. From being a hurricane to the Great New Orleans Flood. Emphasizing water damage because water was excluded from so many different homeowners insurance policies.
It's absurd.
Yeah, and it gives an example like wind is covered for a lot of these places, but flood damage, water damage is not. So if the wind blew the roof off a building, that would be covered. But then, okay, so wait, after the wind blows the roof off the building, it rains, thus weakening the structure, and then a wave comes through with the flood and just wipes out the whole structure.
That's not covered.
That's not covered because that's just
this is
water.
when it gets into slab cases.
Right.
Which were literally a slab case is when... Because Hurricane Katrina had like 140, 180 mile per hour winds. It was blowing houses away.
There'd be nothing left but like the slab.
The foundation of the house, the slab that everything was put on.
So here's the issue. It's obvious the house is gone. There was damage.
But what did it? And we don't know because nobody was there because everybody took the advice of government and news agencies saying, get out of here.
Right.
Don't be here.
If you can't prove what caused the damage, then, it was probably flood, so we're not going to cover that. It's insane. It's clearly the hurricane, right?
Clearly the hurricane.
Which is water and wind, but since water's not covered.
It talks about how, historically, the law and therefore the process has been that in cases of effective proximate cause, if it's unclear which thing did it, you're going to err on the side of the thing that the policy does cover is going to be the determiner and it'll be paid out. But since then, and this was before Katrina happened, there has been a concerted effort on insurance companies' parts to include legal jargon that makes no sense to a layperson in their policies.
Right.
That basically an anti-effective proximity clause.
Right. So like if wind and water synergistically cause the same damage, it is not covered.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
God, being an adult sucks, man.
Right.
Like I miss not having to worry about any of this. I miss not having to worry about any of this. It was such an easier time in my life.
That chapter was very infuriating. Chapter 9.
Chapter 9 was so infuriating. So let's see. So chapter 6 got into segmenting automobile claims between, simply put, people that have attorneys and those that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something that I think we were going to get to that we never actually did.
Sorry, I'm jumping all around like crazy.
Well, I mean, it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
Like something that we talk about in one chapter reminds us of something that was discussed in another chapter because it's complex.
And it's like a textbook, like you said. You really don't need to read it in order.
An important tactic, I'm gonna quote a paragraph here. An important tactic is to emphasize and even misstate the cost of hiring an attorney. This element was explained in the claims manual's recommended attorney economics script. Quite often, our customers ask if an attorney is necessary to settle a claim. Some people choose to hire an attorney, but we would really like the opportunity to work directly with you to settle the claim.
Aww.
Attorneys commonly take between 25 to 40% of the total settlement you receive from an insurance company, plus the expenses incurred. If you settle directly with Allstate, however, the total amount of the settlement is yours. At any time in the process, you may choose to hire an attorney. I would, however, like to make an offer to you first. This way, should you go to an attorney, you would be able to negotiate with the attorney so his or her fees would only apply to amounts over my offer to you.
That sounds so nice, really.
It sounds so nice, but it's actually actively screwing you over. You don't want to know how much the insurance company is going to supposedly offer you before seeking legal counsel, because in all instances that have been documented, whenever you approach these claim settlements with an attorney versus without an attorney, the payout is always going to be higher if you have an attorney. So if you get the offer prior to going to the attorney, you're going to be put in a situation where no attorney is going to want to work with you because the amount that you're going to get over what you've been offered will be so negligible, there's no point in getting an attorney offered to you. Because they're not going to magically raise their price to whatever it should be. And as well, that attorney is earning their money by representing you.
It's not like they're taking your money.
They're not taking your money. Like, that's part of the claim settlement when the attorney is helping you get the money that you're owed. Like, you're not paying them. It's coming out of the claim. It's evil. It really is. And and the thing is, and this is where I think I disagree with the author, right? Because there was something that he said at the end of the introduction that I straight up disagreed with, right? This is the final paragraph of the introduction. The point of view in this book is pro-consumer, but it is not anti-insurance. Insurance is essential to our economic security. But if insurance is to maintain its role as the great protector of the standard of living of the American middle class, prompt and fair claim handling has to be the rule. This book explores why that doesn't always happen and why it is even less likely to happen today than 15 or 20 years ago. End quote. And even less likely to happen 14 years after the book was published.
So what part do you disagree with?
The idea that insurance is essential to our economic security. And I want to be clear here. I'm not saying all insurance should be done away with. What should be done away with is health insurance. I do not think that the health industry should be a for-profit industry.
Sure.
I am not going to argue the importance of auto insurance. I am not going to argue the importance of homeowners insurance. I'm not going to argue the importance of life insurance. These are all things going into this book that I had no opinions on. My opinion is solely on health insurance, which it makes it ironic that this book
barely covers
health insurance. What it says about health insurance is, and I don't remember specifically where it was, and I wish I had jotted it down, health insurance isn't that bad. That's what it said. Health insurance isn't that bad. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me?
Right.
I think it might have been actually at the start of one of these chapters. I think it might have been at the start of might have been at the start of chapter 7, maybe. So I've been reading a lot of quotes here. I want you to read the first.
Yeah, I found it.
I want you to read the first paragraph of chapter 7.
Chapter 7, let's see. Okay, so a video produced by Healthcare for America Now, an advocacy group for health insurance reform, portrays an unusual approach to games. A golfer tackles another player who's about to swing. A tennis player aims ninja throwing stars at his opponent across the net. And when one poker player shows 4 aces, another shouts, "I've got nunchucks." The justification for the unorthodox behavior: insurance company rules.
Insurance company rules.
The video explains there's 2 ways to go through life. You can play by the rules, or you can follow insurance company rules, where you can do whatever the hell you want.
The one part of the book that genuinely made me laugh out loud. So
I'm going to start using, though. I've got nunchucks just at game night every now and then.
yeah.
I think.
So it's right after that paragraph where it says, property/casualty insurance isn't that bad. Parentheses, health insurance isn't quite that bad either.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why it doesn't talk about it. Because in this author's opinion, health insurance isn't that bad. So that's another actually aspect of this conversation that we glossed over when discussing why we're talking about this book. So after the news broke that etched onto the bullet casings was deny, defend, depose, naturally, Mr. Feinman's book became an incredibly popular book for purchase.
And it was out of print, I think, right?
It was out of print. And Amazon, oddly enough, was the only people selling it. And so there were a lot of people approaching Feinman in a myriad of ways regarding how to purchase this book. And so all he said about it, he gave a tweet that said, I don't remember exactly what the tweet said. I'll include it in the link dump. But basically, it said, I've had a number of people asking me about my book, Delay, Deny, Defend. If you're interested in buying one of these books, currently it is out of print and Amazon is the only company that sells it. But the ebook you can get through Amazon. And that's pretty much all that it said.
Yeah.
And so naturally, it's the hottest book around.
Sure.
And there's loads of people trying to buy it. And I mean, I can see why. It's such an invigorating read.
I can imagine someone just cracking it open, just so excited to get started, and then falling asleep by page 3.
No, but I mean, the thing is, even though it doesn't get into health insurance really at all, it doesn't really need to, does it? Because all
principles are the same.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. Like when you get right down to it, all of these insurance companies do the exact same thing. They take your money and they pay out claims, with the added caveat of them trying to avoid paying out as many claims as possible because they want to keep that ratio of money made versus money spent as close to 100 as possible.
Sure.
Which is 100 would be paying no claims at all.
Which is probably ideal. That's.
I mean, sure, in theory. I mean, like, you don't want to use your auto insurance. You don't want to get in a crash. You don't want to use your health insurance. You don't want to get sick. But I mean, let's be realistic here. You're gonna get into an accident eventually. Something is going to happen to your house eventually. You're going to be hurt or sick or ill in some way, shape, or form eventually.
I feel like you're threatening me a little bit, but yeah, you're right.
Sorry. Like, I mean, that's
someday, and this day may never come.
These are the realities of life. These are the realities of life. Anyways, so chapter 9 talked all about Katrina, which was just, it really showed the failures of the insurance system in a lot of ways. Chapter 10 gets into insurance fraud and other frauds, which we've talked about quite a bit in detail. Is there anything else about chapter 10 that we didn't get to that you'd like to bring up?
No, I kind of jumped ahead a bit already and talked about how it's more of a public opinion campaign to start to think of it as worse than it actually is.
It's just propaganda, really. Like, to the point that people think that insurance fraud is more prevalent than insurance companies denying claims incorrectly. Make of that what you will.
But yeah, 368 in 10 years. I mean, sure, it happens, but it's kind of like the claims of voter fraud. It's just not very often.
Oh God, did you hear that story of those guys that tried to commit insurance fraud by, like, they had a Lamborghini or something, and they tried to sick bears. No, that's not what it was. I'm sorry. They tried to claim that bears damaged the car, when in reality they damaged the car.
Bears.
They were trying to say that their Lamborghini suffered a bear attack.
I guess that's covered.
If it were true, it would have been.
That's interesting.
Anyways, chapter 11. This was, in my opinion, probably the most useful chapter, and it's the one that I highlighted the most.
Chapter 11, how consumers can respond to delay, deny, defend.
What it fundamentally comes down to is you need to know your policy.
Right.
You need to know what your insurance company will do for you. It really emphasizes from the get-go, listen, Allstate is not your friend.
Right.
State Farm is not your friend. State Farm is not a good neighbor.
Your insurance company is a business, and its relationship with you is a business relationship.
Right. So he was saying, like, by that same token, they're not your enemy either. I disagree, but whatever.
They do actually need your business.
They
eventually.
do.
Yeah.
They do. It's in their best interest to ensure that you continue to pay their premiums.
Right.
So at the end of the day, they are going to work with you if you work with them, is the argument that Feinman gives.
And to live in America, which we do need to have insurance. So this chapter kind of gives you advice on how to go about finding insurance that would be the best financially for you.
And while it's a little dated, I think a lot of it is still very
Sure.
good.
I mean, the first thing it says is, if possible, avoid doing business with a company that has a history of anti-consumer behavior.
Yeah.
Which I guess good luck finding a company with a history.
It says, in a 2007 study, CFA, I don't know what that stands for, but it's irrelevant. CFA,
it's the Consumer Federation of America.
Okay, Consumer Federation of America, thank you. Looked at claims, settlements, practices, treatments of policyholders after natural disasters, profits, and other factors, and recommended that consumers avoid Allstate if at all possible. Fight Bad Faith Insurance Companies, a website produced by a self-described group of consumers, quote, who had legitimate claims that were denied by bad faith insurers, end quote, ranks The Hartford, State Farm, and Allstate as the worst in its claim practices Hall of Shame, and Chubb, that's two B's, Amica, A-M-I-C-A, and Aliens? I don't know. Alliance?
Maybe?
A-L-L-I-A-N-Z as best in its Hall of Fame. But the website does not explain exactly how the rankings were arrived at or who is doing the ranking. So I will say I've heard of Chubb, and this is not the first time I've heard that Chubb is the best insurance company you could go with. I heard that from an insurance attorney. Basically said that if you want the best possible insurance, go with Chubb.
What type of insurance is Chubb?
That's a very good question. I've never heard of Chubb.
I haven't either.
I think that there's an interesting correlation between the insurance companies that we know the best, State Farm, Allstate, Farmers, as being the worst ones,
sure,
versus the best ones being the ones that we have no idea about.
This podcast is not brought to you by Chubb, Amica, and Alliance.
Supposedly the best ones. Let's see. Other things that I noted.
Essentially, it just goes into, like, the bottom line for choosing a company is just to look for information about it, which makes sense, but it's very difficult to do.
Rely on an independent insurance agent who represents several companies. Now, that is good advice.
Sure.
Speaking anecdotally, when I was buying my house, I did not, just pick a random insurance company. I went to an independent insurance company who they didn't provide the insurance. They shopped for me. They wound up, in the end, getting me insurance through Farmers. So I don't know how good it actually is, because
Sure.
I didn't actually look at the policy. I was more interested in moving than I was in reading a 30-page document. I should probably read
Well,
it.
to be fair, the next bit of advice is read your policy.
Yeah, I should have done that. But I mean, like, let's be honest here.
Who's going to do that?
Who reads the terms of use? Who reads these policies? We should read them. And honestly, it is good advice. The problem being that these policies are so difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm. Deliberately so.
Deliberately so. I did try reading it, and I very quickly, my eyes glossed over, and I forgot that it existed. Some other things that stood out to me, all risks does not mean all risks. So all risk
the policy
policies,
itself.
Yeah, the policy, all risks, does not actually mean all risks. Like, you would think, based off of that name, like, oh, I don't need to read this. It covers everything. If anything happens, I can just go to my homeowner's insurance company and be like, hey, I have a claim. And they'll be like, no.
Yeah, they speak about that in the Katrina chapter for sure. And that's also where they talk about how a hurricane policy might not actually cover all hurricane damage.
And replacement cost does not mean replacement cost.
Right. Part of that, too, was that, like, there's two different ways to pay back for homeowners after a loss, and that's just a cost of the item, which may be like 70-year-old furniture, which probably doesn't cost that much anymore, versus a rebuild cost, or I forget how they phrased it.
Which leads into another very good piece of advice. When you are getting your insurance, you, specifically your homeowner's insurance and auto insurance, you want full replacement coverage.
Right.
You do not want an equivalent price, because your home and your car will deflate in value very quickly over time. So you want an equivalent replacement, because inflation's a thing.
Yeah. Pay for modern cabinets, not for cabinets built in the 1970s.
Right. Like, it talks about that a lot in the chapters regarding homeowners insurance. You know, if you have an especially old home, like me, my home was built in 1967. My home is not up to modern building codes. If I have extensive damage, like, let's say, to the wiring, I'm going to have my wiring completely replaced, because it is archaic. It's stupid.
Sure.
I could go on a whole tangent about how stupid the wiring in my house is, but they're right. Like, you cannot, like, you have to replace it to modern equivalent codes. And that needs to be reflected in your policy. Let's see, some other stuff that I jotted down. Ooh, and this is a really good one. You do not have to accept the computer's number as final. And so if a claims adjuster is giving you a figure based on what they plopped into a computer, you don't have to accept that. You may feel like that's your only choice. It isn't.
Right. And the bigger piece of advice that encompasses that is just like, if you have a loss, understanding the coverage, understanding the claims system, and then getting help if you need it. So this is kind of the understanding the claims system, in that it is a process. So the first person you talk to who's gathering information may not be able to help you as much as you hope they can. And it's maybe not their fault. They're just part of the bureaucracy. So if you need to go a step above them to talk to somebody else, then do that. And above that, you can do that also. Eventually, you might get someone who can help you, or someone who just doesn't want to hear from you anymore, so can just settle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think really important is the getting help if you need it, for sure.
Yeah. Be like Mr. Incredible.
In many ways.
Let's see. Other bits that stood out to me.
Fully documenting.
Take notes on every conversation you have with all insurance company personnel. Reference what you were told.
Right.
In every step of that conversation, if you're having multiple conversations.
And it even mentions, I think, following up with the people and saying, this is what we spoke about. Could you just confirm that I have all the details correct? And they may or may not respond. But
build your own claim file, right? Like, no, like, by looking at your insurance policy, you'll know what they'll be wanting.
Mhm.
So build that ahead of time before you even file the claim, right? And then include like, a page at like an introductory page. They call it something else. A cover page.
Yeah.
Include a cover page saying like, included in my file is this, 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 and this. All of the things that I know that you're going to want. The more you can give the impression that you know what you're about, the more likely they're not going to screw you over.
Mm. And part of that, too, is understanding what you are not responsible for providing. Like if they ask you for so much information, why should I have to give you the receipt for a TV I bought 5 years ago? That's ridiculous.
Oh my God. There was some litigation. One of the stories that really annoyed me. It was one of the auto insurance stories.
Sure.
It was someone rear-ended someone else, and in the litigation process, they were asking a myriad of questions that were completely unnecessary and also deeply personal, right?
Mm.
Like, a lot of the questions that were asked were ones that were included in the medical documentation that they could have just looked at themselves. And then there was like, at one point, one of the examples of the personal questions was like, are you two sleeping together?
Right.
It's like, what bearing does that have on this process in any way?
Insane.
It really is insane.
Yeah. It also mentions kind of trying to stay calm throughout the process, which I'm sure is difficult. Complaining doesn't help. They've heard all the excuses and things before. You're not going to suddenly melt their heart.
Right. And so that was the other part of it too, right? Acknowledge when you are not in a position to do that. Like if you need to get a lawyer to represent you,
Right.
if like, let's say you lose your home, right? Like you've lost your home, you've lost everything inside your home. You might have even lost a family member that was in the home. Like let's say it was a fire, like a really bad fire. You are in no position to most likely be able to calmly go through the claims process at that point. Get a lawyer.
Yeah.
Save yourself some heartache.
Yeah. Focus on just surviving. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's chapter 11. In my opinion, probably the most useful chapter in this book.
I kind of wish I would have started there, honestly. But.
Yeah, me too. But, that was back before we realized that this is a textbook.
Right.
So then we get to chapter 12. And I'll be honest, I didn't finish this chapter. I was halfway through it before I had to come over here to record.
So here's the thing. Chapter 12 is how to stop, delay, deny, defend. And it goes into... Sorry, go ahead.
What I read about this chapter, it was a lot of like the history of the regulation and policies that have been imposed on insurance companies, and I didn't get through all of it, but it did lead me to believe that at some point it was going to mention what we can do about regulating insurance companies moving forward.
There is a whole lot about regulation, a lot of it kind of political based, like what you can do as far as advocacy programs, elections, stuff like that. I'll be honest, this chapter was kind of rough for me too, and I was very tired. This is about an hour ago that I read it, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything in there that you found useful or worth mentioning?
So, essentially, the chapter just argues that, like, any kind of reform of the insurance policies, programs, any kind of meaningful reform is going to require like a really fundamental shift in the regulatory process, paradigm, whatever. It's going to be a lot more than one person can do.
Like murdering a CEO, causing a global conversation, as an example.
Murder is wrong.
Murder is wrong. We are not endorsing murder. We would never do that.
Right.
But what's the book say?
No, they really want to try and move toward like a consumer-centric model that prioritizes fairness, transparency, and accountability, which sounds great. I don't know exactly how capitalistic that sounds.
It's not.
So I'm not sure how likely it is to happen.
No,
right?
that's socialism.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that. Like, let's be clear here. I love socialist policies. Hey, you know what the library is? A socialist project. But that's the problem, right? Like, socialism is always, always, always going to have a really tough time when faced up against capitalism.
Mm.
I mean, that's the way it is, right? Like, anytime you want to do any kind of reform that is morally good, if money is involved, you're going to have a hard time.
Sure. What do I get out of it? Yeah.
You've got lobbyists that are going to have a lot more money than you, arguing for keeping things as they are, which will allow those systems to just get progressively worse.
Right. Or just using scare tactics like the word socialism. Sure.
Right. Right. I'm glad that we read this book. I think that it's always good having more information.
Sure.
Am I going to tell everyone that they should absolutely read this book? No, not really. I mean, if you do, read chapter 11.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. It's a lot of the history of how insurance companies got this way.
Yeah.
And that's valuable information to have. I just don't know how applicable it could all be other than, kitchen table conversation.
Yeah. But maybe, if you're in like a really good place mentally and you're feeling great about the way things are going and you're happy about insurance companies, this is a great way to just get out of that headspace in the complete opposite direction and just become enraged at so many things.
God, this book was so upsetting because, like, what we glossed over the most was all of the just terrible stories.
There are so many anecdotes here, and they're all frustrating
so
and enraging.
Incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
And I just didn't bring them up because they were all just awful. just and the most frustrating part of every single one of those anecdotes is they're exactly the same as all of the anecdotes that I've ever heard about people coming up against insurance companies.
Sure.
Like,
and so many of it, like if they had settled to begin with, it probably would have cost the insurance company less money to start with if they had just paid the claim.
Yeah.
But there's a mention in here, and I don't know it. I don't even know how to look for it. But essentially, the company is saying that we're litigating these even if we know it is a loser, in that it will dissuade people in the future from suing.
That was a State Farm quote in chapter 6. I'm going to look for it. So there's this woman, Grace Hess, a former senior claims adjuster for State Farm. She acknowledged that a similar missed policy, that was the
soft
term,
tissue, whiplash,
permeated the State Farm claim process. She was specifically told by her supervisors, she stated, quote, that the company was going to start forcing soft tissue cases through arbitration and trial for the purpose of sending a message to claimants, their attorneys, and the public in general that it is simply not profitable to pursue a soft tissue case when State Farm is the insurer. This policy was applicable to both to third-party BI, bodily injury, claims, and claims made by State Farm's insurers. Literally saying, we're going to make this such a pain in the ass that you're never going to try a whiplash claim again.
Right.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I mean, how angry do you want to get? I don't know. We could
honestly. I mean, go ahead, get angry. Like, I mean, it's
just all, like you said, all the examples in there are just so infuriating, and it doesn't even mention just the psychic cost to those people's mentality, and just having to go through all of this just to get what they are owed and what they thought they buyed and paid for. Just the peace of mind that did not happen.
I mean, and the fact of the matter is, we know this, right? I mean, like, how often do you know people in your life that will, like, maybe not directly say it, but you can tell that they're jumping through hoops to avoid having to even interact with their insurance?
Sure.
Like, I mean, me personally, I was an EMT for professionally, I should say. I was a volunteer, but then I, started working on an ambulance. I worked on an ambulance for a little over a year, and the common theme I quickly discovered the entire time that I was an EMT for an ambulance district was people will do anything possible to avoid an ambulance trip.
It's so expensive.
It's so expensive. It's prohibitively expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you are well off, you don't want an ambulance trip, right? Like, even the most basic of services, if there's transportation to a hospital involved, even if there isn't transportation to a hospital involved, if you know, medics are performing a service for you, even if they don't transport you to the hospital, you're still going to get billed for it.
Sure.
I have a story.
Okay.
And I think it's worth sharing because it shows how broken this system is in my mind. Because it nothing else really has stuck with me, but this has. So there was a guy who, and I'm going to be a little bit vague here because, you know, not FEMA. Because what is the law? God.
It's HIPAA, but
HIPAA.
I mean,
Thank you.
you're not bound to it anymore, but yeah, I got you.
Well, I'm a little bit bound to it. I'm going to be a little bit vague here because HIPAA.
Sure.
There was a guy who was in a rear collision auto accident. He collided into someone in front of him. The people involved in the vehicle in front of him, they were fine. His son, who was very small and in a booster seat in the back, was also fine. Always use car seats. He, however, the skin of his forehead split open. I could see his skull. He was in shock, obviously. He had no idea how severe the damage was. I didn't realize this, right? I was talking to him. He had so much blood on his face, and I was asking him, you know, basic questions like, you know, what happened? How did you hit, like, the steering wheel, etc.?
Yeah.
And I'm operating under the assumption that we're going to the hospital because his skull is split. His skull isn't split open, but the skin on his forehead is split open.
I see where it's going. But go ahead.
I can see it. And he needs a lot of stitches.
Sure.
And he's like, I'm not going. No, I'll go to the hospital tomorrow if I need to. And I'm like, my man, you need to. And he's like, no, I don't. And I'm like, sir, I can see your skull. And he's like, excuse me? And I pulled out my phone. I put on selfie mode. I handed him my phone. And then with my pen, I parted his hair and his skin parted with it.
Oh, gosh.
So he could see his own skull.
Yeah.
He was very reasonable after that.
Yeah, man.
He was like, okay, let's go. Let me just call my wife real quick.
Right. Goodness.
That's how bad it is.
Right.
Nobody wants to go to the fucking hospital and take care of themselves because they know in the long run they're going to be saddled with massive amounts of debt.
And what if it was no big deal?
What if
my chest hurts? Maybe it's just gas.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. And
it's awful.
You know, I hear people argue that, you know, if we had like a universal healthcare system, there would be like way more people just like taking advantage of the system. And in my mind, it's like, what do you mean?
Well, that's the thing.
Do you mean like they're getting care?
Right. Getting health care is awful. No, there's so much trying to bank on the fear of people of like what might happen. And it's like bad things are already happening now. Can we just try something different to see? Like well, not all, but pretty much all the other developed countries have done this. Why can't we figure it out? And one of the complaints is such a long wait to see a specialist or something. It's like you wait months now. I don't see how that's any different.
You're gonna wait regardless. Yeah. You're gonna wait regardless. It may as well be taxed, which will be cheaper for you in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I will say, you know, there are some countries that are backsliding a little bit, right?
Sure.
Like, I have some friends in the UK.
Yeah, there's a movement to privatize, isn't there?
There's a movement to privatize in the United Kingdom. And I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. Like, you know, I was straight up telling my friend, like, dude, you don't want this. And he's like, I know. And it's just, it's not good.
I do wonder what the propaganda in that case is saying the case for privatization would be. If it's more of it's your money, you should have, you know, your own say over it, or if it's just fear about possible system breakdown or something. I don't know.
Well, I think it comes down to racism a lot of the time. That's certainly the argument opposing universal health care here, I think. I was talking to one of my coworkers about this. I said to him, I think that we'd be way better off if we just did away with health insurance entirely. And we just had universal health care, and we just, paid taxes for it, and that would be all well and good. And he was in agreement with me until I started talking about taxes. And then he started pushing at me this argument about,
what if immigrants got health care?
What if immigrants got health care?
Wouldn't that be awful?
You had to pay for it. And it's like, oh no, I'm paying for people to get care?
Right.
I mean, let's really look at that. What are our tax dollars going to now? Bombing the Middle East. I don't want my tax dollars to go to that, but I would love my tax dollars to go to people getting the care that they need.
Sure.
That would be great.
Sure.
Because that's one of the core pillars of improving our society, right? If you let people get healthcare, if you get people fed, if you get people housing, a lot of the crime is gonna be cleared up so quickly.
Crime is down regardless, year over year.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But
it's in the media more.
Yeah. Looking at the news, you wouldn't know that crime is down, because that's all that's ever really discussed is crime. And it gives people the impression that crime is at its worst, even though it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we're getting on a tangent.
I know. It's the most frustrating thing, just because I want a child to be able to have their cancer treatment paid for, and it shouldn't matter how much money the child's family has.
Yeah.
They should be able to have that covered, because, everyone deserves to live and have health care. It's so frustrating.
No medical professional gets into that line of work to have to rail against insurance.
Sure.
Nobody. No doctor, no EMT, no nurse, no one. And it's just so... I don't think I have much more to say.
Yeah. I think it'll get cyclical complaining eventually. So
yeah, I think I'm already there. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. This is a bonus episode, so I hope you enjoyed the bonus. We're gonna have shortly I hope you all enjoyed listening. This is going to be the first in a series of maybe 2 more bonus episodes. I am going to be discussing with my friend Natalie. Did you meet Natalie? Do you know her?
Yeah.
Yeah? We're going to be talking about In Broad Daylight, murder in Skidmore, Missouri. And the reason why we're going to be talking about that is because I feel like it's very relevant to this cultural conversation that we're having, right? Because this dude was killed in broad daylight. And while, yes, they did arrest someone who I personally think is a patsy, what was the sentiment when we found out who this guy was?
I'm going to look forward to that. I know nothing about what you're speaking of, so I'll have to
The sentiment was a lot of jokes about, I'd give you my thoughts and prayers, but they're kind of held up in claims. There were so many comments that were so savage, just so apathetic. And I think that it is, directly tied to this. Unarguably tied to this. Whoever it was that killed that guy made it very clear with those bullets.
Sure.
Deny, defend, depose. I don't know if that's the answer, but I'm not mad about it. I'm not mad about it. There was a TikTok I saw. It was a news segment where there was a reporter on the street talking to some people that worked with that CEO, right? It was a man and a woman. The woman didn't say anything, but her body language expressed it all, right? The guy was like, yeah, I knew him. And, he was a good guy. And then, like, the woman, the look on her face, she just looked away like, yeah, okay, sure. The guy was like, he was a good guy. I liked him. But, I get it.
I get it.
I get it. Even someone that knew him was like, yeah, I get it.
That's what you want your friends to say after you've been murdered. It's like, no, yeah, I get it.
I get it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about that book, and we've discussed a portion of it, and we've got a little bit more to go. It'll be certainly more than one episode about that discussion, because I think it just, I don't know. While they're radically different situations, I think there is a broader discussion of like what brings people to the point where they are prepared to commit violence, and then everyone around them is prepared to say nothing.
Mm. Or offer support, even.
You're right.
For sure.
Yeah. But thank you for being on to chat with me about this, Clifton.
Thank you. It's my first podcast episode, so it's exciting.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. If you ever want to chat about something maybe more along the lines of fiction,
I mean, something with
my usual bag.
a fun plot to
something
discuss.
Something a little less dry. Yeah.
But I enjoy the textbook, and I assume I can sell it back to campus for a few hundred. No, right? No, 10? No.
Thank you to Midwest for the equipment and the space that I reserved. Thank you to Jake Weller. He provided our music. Thank you to Josh Hughes for your patronage. Thank you all for listening. And let me know what you guys thought of this episode. I love the feedback. Bye.
Bye.